Hello, and welcome to the sixth video lecture of Quantitative Analysis for Business Decisions QABD, semester number 2, model number 1. In today's video lecture, we are going to see types of data or types of data sources. So, we know that statistics deals with data, and we need data for analysis. But how do we collect this data? What are the sources of collecting data? So we have two primary sources of or two main sources of collecting data. They are primary data sources and secondary data sources. So this primary data sources, what is this primary data source? Primary data source or primary data is the data that is gathered by the researcher himself. It is the original data or fresh data, and it is the first hand information that is gathered by the researcher. It was not existing before. When the researcher collects the data, it exists. On the other hand, secondary data is the second hand data. That is, someone else has collected it and kept it before. Now, the researcher is using that data for his research. So, it is not fresh data. It has been recorded previously. It is past data. So, this is the main difference between primary and secondary data. Now, let us understand some more differences between primary and secondary data. So, what are these differences between primary and secondary data? So, main differences, if you see in the meaning, it is that primary data, sorry, primary data refers to the first hand data gathered by the researcher himself. That is, the researcher himself is collecting the data, and he is collecting at the same time, where that is at the time when he needs the data. So that is why it is considered to be fresh data. On the other hand, secondary data means data collected by someone else earlier. So it is past data. Someone else might have done similar kind of research, and he might have collected data before. So that data is being used now by the researcher. Such kind of a data source is known as secondary data source. Then the second distinction is based upon the time. Data, so that is primary data, is real time data. That is, this is current data, present data. It tells you the real situation, what is now. Whereas on the other hand, secondary data is past data. That is, it gives you past information. It gives you the information of the time when the data was collected by someone else. The third point of distinction is about the process of data collection. The process of data collection is very involved in primary data. That is, the researcher is very much involved. He has to go and collect the information. On the other hand, secondary data is quite quick and easy to collect. So it is quite easy to collect because someone else has already collected it. You just need to take his or her permission and use the data. The next point of difference is about source. So what are the sources of primary data? Primary data sources are surveys, observations, experiments, questionnaire, personal interviews, observations, etc. So these are some of the sources of primary data. On the other hand, some of the sources of secondary data include government publications, that is, publications or reports that are published by the government or government agencies. It may be state government or central government. Websites of any organization, books, journals, articles, internal records, reports of companies, census data. Next one is the cost. So what is the cost involved in primary data? Collection of primary data is very expensive. On the other hand, when it comes to secondary data, it is quite economical. With respect to the time required for collection, the time required for collection is very long in primary data because you are collecting the information, that is real time information. On the other hand, collection of information in secondary data is quite short or very less, because you are just uh, collecting the information or aggregating the information who which has been collected by someone else. If we want to see which data source is more specific, definitely the primary data source is quite specific, because it relates to the problem of study. Now, for example, if you are the researcher and you are studying the population of Belgaum district, and then the primary data will be like you are going and checking in individual houses how many people are staying, you are noting down, so it is like a census that you are doing. This is primary data, and that is why it will give you current situation, that is a result of current situation, data of current situation. Now, that is quite specific in nature. On the other hand, secondary data is not specific because it has been collected by someone else based upon his or her need which was there. So his need might be, for example, number of adults in Belgaum. So he might have given you a particular data. This is the population of adults in Belgaum district. So what will happen is, based upon that, you might do some analysis and you might come up with what might be the population of Belgaum now. So this may not be that specific, though you'll get an idea, it may not be specific. The next point of difference is based upon the availability. Primary data is quite crude form, whereas when it comes to secondary data, it is a referred form, or it is a refined form. Crude form because the raw data which is there, it has to be first filtered and then converted it into a refined form, which is a usable form for the project. And lastly, based upon accuracy and reliability, accuracy and reliability of primary data is more, whereas the accuracy and reliability of secondary data is relatively low. So these are some of the major points of differences between primary data sources and secondary data sources. I hope you have understood today's lecture. If you have any difficulties, you can contact me.